Hello, I'm Sarah French and the CRO here at TAINA, and joining me today is Rich Kent, our Chief Technology Officer, James Sweetman, Head of Product, and Sean Bowie, our Infrastructure Lead. We'll be discussing a very current topic around AI, generative AI, more specifically in the regulatory compliance and operational tax space, and the opportunities it may bring if it's really leveraged. As you know, we issued 4 polls, and today we'll be discussing openly the results of those. Anything to add before we start looking at these results, Tim?
No, let's jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jump in. Is your organisation prepared to integrate AI, GenAI, into its tax operational process? I guess first and foremost, were any of you surprised by the results that we have?
I don't think I'm shocked. It's been such a big thing over the last kind of year, right? But I think everyone went through a phase of kind of seeing if it was a bit of a hype trend. And now it's kind of looked like it's got a bit more longevity and there's a bit more kind of to it. You're starting to see businesses look at it and kind of looking at that adoption process. So it kind of makes sense people are at that exploration stage, trying to work out what it could do, what are the business benefits, where it could assist. And I think the poll perfectly shows that, right? Is the majority of people are in that kind of exploratory phase. And rightfully so, right? Is you've got to find that business need to kind of meet the usage of it instead of going the other way around. So it makes sense from my opinion.
I'd actually expect the number that have no plans at all to be a little bit higher, because the specific question was around tax operations. Take the large FIs; they've all got innovation departments and sections, but I think maybe our question specifically in tax ops was interesting. Like I have no doubt most organisations are looking at AI, but it's clear it's not filtering through to the field of tax ops. Like I really would have expected that to be a little bit higher, I think.
Do you think maybe that's because I think the general assumption is that tax ops always has to be manually paper driven, and no one can see kind of a way, or kind of a way of moving on from that, because they are so stuck in the world of paper in with tax documentation. I mean, especially in spaces like tax reclamation, it's very paper heavy. I do wonder if that's why it's a change, isn't it? It's an evolving change.
Possibly. Also, I've noticed historically that these certainly larger organisations rely on sort of innovation coming in from outside organisations, so that whilst they might not have AI experience in house, using a supplier like TAINA, that's how you get innovation, like by buying it in, essentially. But
Yeah, and I think to your point, Rich, especially if you're looking wider, is that the prevalence of AI tools which could be used for you personally. I know it's within tax ops, but like you can start exploring personally is quite amazing insofar as that we can. I personally have a ChatGPT like account which I use and I kind of play with, and I built like a tax bot on it just to see what it could do, if you see what I mean. So I think that because you can easily go and do that, you can easily create an account. It's it does sort of lend anyone who's sort of curious into sort of like giving it a go almost, because it's far more accessible than say like another big technological thing in the last few years. Obviously, when everyone started talking crypto, everyone started talking distributed ledgers. But the thing is, how does the everyday person start going about doing a distributed ledger? It just didn't really have the same traction. Whereas now it's just so available that, you'd seem like, even if you're mildly curious, you can start exploring.
Yeah. Right. I think we'll go into the second poll. What areas of tax ops in your institution would benefit most from AI, Gen AI automation? I've got to say, for me, with having 15 years of tax ops experience covering all of these, I would jump at the chance of having it definitely across the board there. If I was to pick one, first and foremost, my go-to straight away would be on the due diligence part of the process.
Really? In what way? What would you?
Obviously, OCR is great. Kind of like the best one I've seen is is obviously here, and that's not because I work here. It actually really is the best one I've seen. But I wonder what else out there if people think there can be more than OCR in the due diligence space. That would be my one first and foremost. I guess just from an operational perspective, and then obviously I would jump straight to reporting.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Again, what area? Like data quality, that sort of thing? Or?
Yeah. The data quality piece massively, especially the linking from the data side to the tax form side. Obviously, I think the calculation piece is in the middle. I think they would naturally happen, but the two end pieces for that for me would be the biggest bits that I'd love to see AI used as much as possible, and if it could be done. That's the thing. Can it be done? How much of that process can be utilized with AI or GenAI to make it better?
I thought those two might be a little bit higher in the percentage split. I thought, like, when you think about like perceptions would be that the actual compliance rules maybe wouldn't necessarily lend themselves to AI, so they might be a little bit lower. But reporting and the due diligence, data quality, and there are so many fields. OCR, as you mentioned, there's so many ways that AI could be used in those areas that I thought the split would be a little bit leaning towards those two. But
I would agree with you, like in terms of the and so I think two sides. One is that I think the leaning onto due diligence and tax reporting makes sense. I agree with Rich. I think the leaning would be more, and I think the leaning onto those areas also makes sense from a point of view of, if you think about, really AI and ML has been around for so long. The real, advancements which were happening is the fact that AI is getting so much better at dealing with unstructured data. So those are the two pillars. I would think there's the least structured data. The other two are very much more like codified. You get this type of withholding, you get this type of payment, that kind of stuff. So I feel that makes sense. I think what's kind of interesting though, I think the leaning is correct. I think leaning I would have expected more, but I think I think what's quite telling is that how even it is across the board is, to Rich's point, people are still grasping at how to productize this. They don't. There isn't a clear sense in my head. We've got lots of ideas at TAINA and what we're going to do with our stuff. But I think in terms of institutions, it's a bit like we know this is a thing. We're just not entirely sure, and that spread is quite reflective of that.
No, I agree. I also think that, Richard mentioned a point that people have AI designated maybe budgets now, but I just think in the tax operation space specifically, it's really hard to obtain a budget for something that is still so, I guess, new to that part. If you're talking in the IT team or the tech team, straight away they'll be all over it. But from a tax space, given some of the processes are still quite manual, jumping to AI is huge. And it's the fear, it's the fear of the unknown, and then also because tax operations deal with a lot of compliance. Maybe there's a fear of, are we being compliant if we use? Is there any risks involved? Is there any biasness involved if we're using AI? I guess just operationally, I think maybe it needs to catch up, maybe it doesn't. But I think there's a fear of the unknown around AI in that space.
Yeah. Highly sensitive to risk areas, adopting innovation. It's a very it can feel a bit wild. Sorry, Sean, I think I've interrupted you.
Probably. No, it's a great point. I was just going to swing back to a point Sarah and James brought up, was around, and Rich, all of you actually, really, the leaning towards kind of the more kind of paper-based, the unstructured piece, instead of towards the compliance side. But I would see there's really strong benefits towards the compliance side. So where James mentioned, it's structured, it's kind of more rigorous and laid out. It's something AI thrives on. It has its rule set. It knows what to do. And with that rule set, you can start looking at anomaly detection. You can start cross-checking things. You can use that to make sure your compliance is even stronger than before, right? It just comes down to, again, you're going to go off James's words, it's how you productize that. But it definitely has benefits, and I think that's maybe where people are starting to see it, and that's why it's more of an even split. Is each area there's a lot more you can dig into as people start exploring.
AI is absolutely brilliant with the unstructured data, but it's also incredibly good at automating tasks. So if you do have structured data, it, as you say, Sean, it lends itself to that area as well. So
Yeah, because I think, and you're right though, Rich, because it's like it does lend itself very much to those automated tasks. Is when if you start playing with AI, you very quickly kick into that moment of like, okay, what data am I training on it? How consistent am I being? Am I being narrow enough with its scope to get the same results each time? And that's the I challenge anyone who's listening to this to you try ChatGPT and just try putting it in a couple of times and see the divergence of response you get. If you're going to productize it, it has to be consistent. So having, you're right. I think it feels like a silver bullet for due diligence and tax reporting, but realistically, the productization is going to come from probably the other two, which will be very interesting. Codified rules, narrowing the scope of agents, maybe having AI agents working in hierarchies, which I know sounds a bit daunting in Brave New World, but the idea that you have, you have an AI agent checking on other agents. It's literally like mimicking an organizational structure. So you have supervisors, essentially.
Think of it how we all work as humans, right?
Yeah,
we get people to go,
mimicking.
actually, is this correct? You're getting the AI to essentially sense check itself. What is one of the big things, and I'm sure we'll come onto it later, how do you deal with hallucinations? How do you deal with a piece that it's fact checking, but it may not know the answer? If it starts to kind of cross check itself as well before it replies to you, you start to limit some of that as well.
A whole new level of quality assurance, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's very cool.
Yeah,
it's very cool.
That one's a good topic. That one. Okay, right. That one's a good topic. That one. Okay, right. What is the biggest challenge your organisation faces when adopting AI in tax operations? Do you know the biggest thing that stood out for me on this, and probably for all of us here, was that data quality and integration was 0%. I found that one absolutely a little bit mind blowing. I don't know.
Why is that?
Maybe I should.
Is it just perceptions we need to work on? What?
I don't.
I'm gonna make a shot in the dark, and I'm gonna say there's a correlation between exploring in our earlier poll result and a low result there. I think when you explore, it's such a cool thing to demo. Hey, I throw in this thing and I get this result, and it's really quick, and it's written like an entire podcast for me or whatever it is, and it can narrate the podcast. It's great. Try and make it write the same podcast again based on your data. And if you have data variance, if you start making AI and building it into your system, the variance that, and to Sean's point about hallucination, the variance of data can lead to large hallucinations and things you don't expect. So I think it's only when you really get into trying to get replicable results in a productized way of AI that suddenly you may start encountering that more and more. So maybe it's a sort of it's a shot in the dark, but maybe it's just a sort of, this is an early stage thing. So maybe people haven't tried playing with their AI, tapping it into their data at the moment. Maybe they're still to the other, what was the other result was around risk. Maybe it's still hey, let's explore with it in the playground over here. We don't want to bring it in and let it touch.
Maybe that shows like a general, I'm struggling for the word, but people don't really understand how to do it correctly, how to use AI correctly. Anybody, as you say, they can download ChatGPT and you can get a demo up and running in minutes, but to productionize that, to have a really reliable product, that takes skill and time, right? And maybe that's what we're seeing in that result there. Maybe.
Yeah. I've got a few strong opinions on this topic, given I put in my security hat on, and straight off, I am not surprised that's high. I'm shocked it's not higher, for the worry around security and privacy, right? You're essentially asking to send off your company's data to a service to then run AI over it, and there's horror stories of that being used for training, it being collected, and all sorts, right? Again, there's there's ways the industry are adapting. Not everything's closed source. You can run it on your own hardware. You've got other ways to do it around commercial agreements and things. So it's definitely moving in the right direction, kind of as an industry. And I think this comes into the piece where it's still relatively new at large scale, but I think even the companies providing it are still learning where we need to land and what customers want.
Can I ask you a question? This one, just
Yeah.
so you and I, we spend a lot of time talking about security and AI, but do you think people really appreciate that it is an issue? I know we saw 63%, so
Yep.
I'm not being silly, but to your point, I'm surprised it's not higher. Do you think people just go with the flow and they don't really think through the implications of doing it incorrectly?
I don't think that's truly the case. So obviously, we get involved with a lot of different companies, and we see a lot of kind of risk-based policies and kind of pieces we have to work around. And one of those we see quite common at the moment is talks around the usage of AI. What means companies and businesses are thinking about this holistically at a high level, and kind of what risk it means. I think the piece what we've still got to develop on as a whole is what is that risk, but not just what the risk is how you manage that risk. Because like everything, you can mitigate risk, you can manage it. There's an acceptance level somewhere. At each business, it'll be slightly different, but it's finding ways to manage that. What may just be a case of you have an AI model. Instead of it being ChatGPT somewhere in the cloud, it's a model you run locally within your hardware, within your data centers, and it still provides the same functionality, but you know it's at least ring fenced to your area. You're not having to worry about anything else. So that's straight away a big privacy win, right?
Which also brings benefits of having it trained on your data for your purposes, hey, as well. But yeah, I think you're right, Sean. So
just a quick one on the lack of AI expertise. Was that 13%? Do we think that that's across an institution, or maybe more specifically just in the tax operations space, the lack of AI expertise? And because obviously in tax ops you still do get your tech support, but I guess it is quite maybe niche,
I think
sort of some specific. I mean, I don't know if I'm putting everyone into a box here, and I shouldn't be.
No, I think it's an interesting one, because if you were to ask people, like, what do you deem as AI expertise? Like, I think sometimes, like, there is a huge growth of prompt engineering. Like, and if you said prompt engineering, you'd be like, what do you mean? It's the whole idea that you're either via code or via just closely written English, like you're essentially giving tasks and sectioning out like an architecture of prompts and tasks to AIs, as though you were giving it to the sort of classic comparison is like a very just fresh out of school like intern who's like incredibly great at accessing the web and getting everything in one place, but doesn't know where or how to start. So it's this kind of like prompt engineering is a huge part. I know Sean will probably, and Rich will school me on this, but it's also like that whole idea of the data and the privacy concerns, building an AI model into your own environments, and at a very high level, like especially the idea of first off extracting your data or putting it in a format that can be essentially read by AI. That could be using a OCR technology like TAINA has, or it could be then which large language model do you use to cluster and group your data and make those associations. And then it's then you can use different LLMs for either that human interaction or how they analyze and access those clusters of information, if you see what I mean. So it's not just this one shot thing where you just like pull in an LLM and it's like wonderful and it does everything. Like ChatGPT has done a great deal of like hiding a lot of that complexities and all of the nuts and the bolts, and the expertise to build that up. And I think sometimes people, may not actually fully go, oh wow, that's a ton of expertise, like, and very specific. I mean, I think LinkedIn's got some very high pay roles if anyone's interested, like for very specific knowledge about different types of LLMs and how they work.
I think there's also a piece here where the lack of I'm not surprised it's so low in a way, because AI as a term for AI experience is really broad, right? So here at TAINA, We all know OCR amazingly well. It's why it works so well. That's why we work with a lot of universities on it, right? That is a part of kind of AI. It's the machine learning part. But if you were to say, do we have expertise in generative AI or deep learning for doing automotive kind of mapping? No, that's not our business. So it could be a case that we've left it slightly broad there to kind of go on the other side, right?
Yeah.
So.
Okay, last question. Do you believe GenAI can help financial institutions achieve better compliance with international tax regulations like FATCA and CRS? So we had 2 with no votes. So no, AI won't have much impact. And 2, not sure, need more information. I don't know if I'm surprised by those 2. I think for me, the 38% of somewhat depends on the rules. I mean, that we all know that FATCA and CRS it constantly changes, and I think that maybe the general consensus out there with this one specifically is there too much frequent change in order for AI to keep up? Now, our answer would be, of course it would, but AI, should be able to keep up, and probably would keep up better than maybe a human can, if I can say that. But so yeah, I mean, I wasn't kind of massively surprised that those 2 were 0 and the top votes are where they are. I do think AI can boost compliance massively. I think it's more I think it was one of our earlier polls, and I think James, you mentioned on it more, and Sean, maybe it's more the compliance piece of it, where it actually should be used and utilised more than where people are looking at, can I help a pain point, which is the due diligence and reporting side.
I thought there would be. I thought the low answers wouldn't be 0 because one of the previous poll points said there was like 1 in 6 had no plans to look at AI.
Yeah.
So kind of you're thinking that, well, if 1 in 6 don't have no plans to look, then surely there would have been more than 0.
I like the person who's saying, 1 in 6. They're like, no, it will affect us. I'm not going to look at it. I like that kind of cavalier.
So
Exactly.
approach. Playing on the other side, though, that could be going back to the other poll, right? Maybe there's budget constraints. Maybe they know it will impact it. They just don't have the budget to be able to actually look at it, right?
Or security concerns.
Or security. There could be a multitude of factors where they know it could benefit. Maybe we could see it. It doesn't mean it's off the table. We're just not looking.
Yeah, fair point.
But I think to your point, Sarah, there's something which is about with these rule sets. So, like, if you're looking at the IRS and you look at their various publications, and they're pretty good because they publish everything, but you may get a different interpretation of that based on different amendments, and you may get different interpretations when you go to different conferences. You then also get different interpretations when people come up against audit, and a lot of those kind of decisions and presentations and everything like that, they are not. Well, they're not always necessarily documented. They're not always necessarily published. So they're not public domain. So then you're kind of left in the question of like, okay, where do you get this from? And then you also have a situation where, the writing of some of the tax rules and regs can be contradictory. We've seen it whenever we've been speaking with Big Four. Sometimes we have to get a whole bunch of guys in one room, specialists, and they need to hash it out because they'll say, well, what about this reg? And it contradicts this one, and it contradicts this one. Now, if you've got like tax experts, and some of the guys we've worked with have even were the authors of various parts of the IRS's rule set, imagine the capability of hallucinations. Imagine what that could occur there. So there is a sort of a funny thing here, which I think is interesting when they say depends on the rules for that 38%, where I think it's not just depends on the rules, it depends on how the rules are conveyed, if you know what I mean.
I'll tell you something quite interesting. Right, we've asked entities, financial institutions. It would be fascinating to see what tax authorities think.
Yeah.
If we ask the same questions to tax authorities, I wonder what they'd say.
I think they'd be pretty honest. I really do think they'd be really open with how much or even auditors, right? I think they'd think it'd be a blessing if AI was used more in the compliance space. I really do. And in tax authorities, it just goes back to maybe on the data piece. They're not just looking at one piece of data, they're looking at it as a collective, right? So maybe they can then utilize AI to across the board, but that's another talking point. Thank you everybody for joining, and I hope everybody enjoyed listening and who watches it.